come up there for a certain time to do the cultivating. Why, there was nothing to cultivate. It was just steep. It was just a 10 by 8 floor with 2 walls and a roof that was half gone. And we plunked down there, and we had 1 suitcase as our dining room table. We had 1 tin cup, 1 spoon, 1 plate each. And as it turned out, we stayed there for several weeks. This is our water bucket, that long bamboo pole. You hollow it out until the bottom one, and Dad would put it over his shoulder, walk down this trail down to a little watery stream, fill it up, bring it back up, brave all the lizards and the bugs, and then come and we pour the water in that pot and we boil it, and then we pour it back into the water, bamboo water thing. While we were there, some of our friends rescued a few of our possessions from our other house, and at least they brought Mother's accordion. So we sat there with our suitcase, and at least we had music. That's all we had. But they also brought the word that the Japanese order had now gone out officially that all aliens were to surrender. And that the prisoner of war camps had been set up, and if you did not surrender, that you would be shot on sight. What were we going to do? Dad found out that there was a group of 45 businessmen with their families, about 45 in all, women and children, back farther into the hills, 3 days. He made the trek back there and said, what are you going to do about the Japanese order to surrender? They said, we're going to hide out here. We think we can hold out until the United States forces retake the islands. Dad came back, and I remember one gray morning we sat around that suitcase and we said, what are we going to do? Are we going to risk it, or are we going to surrender? We don't know how the Japanese are going to mistreat us when we surrender. What shall we do? That's when Dad took out his Bible again and said, all right, let's see if we have a conduct principle. And he turned to Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God, and the powers that be are ordained of God. We determined that right then the Japanese government were the powers that be in the Philippine Islands, and that the principle seemed to be saying that we should surrender. And that was the answer, because as a result our lives were spared, because not long afterwards the Japanese soldiers came through these very hills like a fine-tooth comb, and they came upon this compound of 45 businessmen, and they massacred the entire group, all 45 men, women, and children. In addition, there was another group of 11 missionaries who died in one slaughter alone. Well, for our case, obeying the Word of God was His means of saving at least our lives, and we very much appreciate the fact the Word of God helped us. Well, we had to pack up again now. So we hired this water buffalo sled. And that water buffalo didn't care whether he walked over rocks. He didn't follow the trail. And you bounce along on this little sled. Dad walked behind to catch anybody who fell off. And we now were traveling down to the lowlands to surrender. It was dusk, and we're just about ready to... This will be part 1 in a minute. We didn't know what to expect. The water buffalo sled led us off at the outskirts of the town. We walked into town, looking around, and Dad went ahead a little bit, and all of a sudden a Japanese soldier came out and bowed very politely to us and escorted us very politely into their garrison. And then they searched our baggage frantically for weapons and for the one word they knew in English, whiskey, whiskey, thinking that all Americans had a stash of liquor. And I'm here to tell you that they found no booze in the missionaries' duffel bags. But they took away 2 cans of concentrated carnation milk that Mother had been saving for me because I was recovering at that point from a bout of dysentery. Then they saw her accordion, and so they said, play. So Mom, knowing no Japanese, and they knowing no English, she bargained in sign language. I play, you give back milk. So it was, yes, indeed, we'll do it. Okay. So while we sat outside not knowing what was going to happen, it now got late, and she then played for 1 hour. And the soldiers sat there in their shaved heads and their black boots and their gold teeth and their long swords, and they clapped and they cheered and they grinned and they had a great time. At the end of the hour, when she completed the concert about 11 o'clock, they gave her back 2 cans of milk, plus, to her surprise, 1 can of salmon. And Mother was very proud of that. She says, that's the first time I ever played professionally. Then they asked the missionaries, well, where do you want to stay tonight? Well, this was unexpected. Normally we thought we'd go right to jail. And Dad knew the name of only one man in that town, and he happened to be the mayor, and he mentioned that mayor's name, and no sooner said than done. They summoned the mayor out of his house, they got him out of bed, and our family slept that night in the mayor's house, in his bed, big 4-poster. Maybe being a prisoner of war wasn't so bad after all. What were we doing out in this dumb shack way up there on the side of the mountains when this is being a prisoner? Well, we're going to pick the story up next week. Next day, the honeymoon was over. The first part of this series called Like Them the Dream, I especially enjoyed a note from a little gal named Shelby, who belongs to somebody here, and she says, Dear Pastor, I like the part when you said, whenever we would catch a grasshopper, we would cut it in half. I think it was the funniest part. So thank you very much, folks, for your response. And yeah, today we're going to have all the lights off in a minute, and that will be even better. Without my glasses, I can't tell whether that's in focus or not. I hope it is. That's pretty good, all right. You remember from last week, our family of 4 in 1939 were called to the Philippines to serve the Lord, and we sailed over on this ship, USS Coolidge. My brother is at age 2 when we started. I was age 6. Then after several years of ministry, I was about 8 or 9 there. Then I want to show you this picture again. Remember, these were a group of 11 missionaries that the Lord sovereignly saved our life, but did not theirs. And I was pondering that this week, especially when Jan told me that one of those folks, by the way, most of these people belong to Jan's denomination, the old German Baptist, now called the North American Baptist. These were very godly people, and they had people praying for them. Now sometimes you hear somebody say, well, if you can just pray hard enough and have enough people praying for you, God will come alongside and save you. Well, these missionaries, in contrast to us, we believe that we should surrender based upon Romans 13, verse 1, to be subject to the higher powers. They felt that the American forces would liberate the Philippines before too long, and so they had determined to hide out. And they hid out in a valley that was so thick with vegetation that the Japanese soldiers walking on the ridge right next to them didn't even see them there. And they were not caught until someone then was tortured and then revealed their hiding place. But I got to thinking about that. Daniel chapter 4 says, He who lives forever, talking about God, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, whose kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and He doeth according to His will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. None shall stay His hand or say unto Him, What doest thou? So we've got a sovereign God, and I cannot explain and tell you any rationale why the Lord was so gracious to provide for our family, but not for these 11 dear people. They were beheaded, including this 9-year-old boy. Jan asked me the question. She said, I wonder what order, whether the 9-year-old boy had to see his mom and dad and the other missionaries beheaded before he was. God says, I am the one that does according to my will. So we then surrendered, did you remember from last week? And took this donkey, water buffalo cart. By the way, every time we passed the river, the water buffalo would submerge to his eyes and his horns. That's why they call him water buffalo. And he would take his time. There's no good pulling him out of there until they were ready to get up, and then away he went. We arrived at that Japanese outpost and were greeted very formally. Mother played her accordion for them, gave them a concert for an hour. And then we slept in the mayor's bed that night, do you remember? And then the next day, they took our belongings and they put it in a push cart and made Dad push this cart with our belongings with a Japanese guard walking beside us right past our house here, and we looked up, and there on our veranda sitting in our swing was a Japanese family watching us as we trundled past with a squeak in the footsteps of our walking to the compound. And I looked up there and said, Dad, there's somebody sitting in our swing. And remember, Dad made that swing. That was a very special spot for us. But we knew that we'd have to leave that family swing and never see it again. They took us to that first compound there in Iloilo, and then later they shipped us by freighter to Manila, to the bigger prison camp set up in Manila. Santo Tomas University. The 4,000 people, civilians, there were other camps for the military people, but these were civilian camps, squashed into this 1-mile compound, all kinds of people, Protestant missionaries, Roman Catholic priests and nuns, blasphemous white trash, businessmen who would go to the Philippines, who had been in the Philippines for a long time, maybe married a Filipino lady, and they would have mestizo children, and they would throw the entire family in this compound because anybody who had any connection with America was in this camp. This is a picture of my brother and myself on some rubber bales. By the way, these photographs were taken after our liberation. Dad then bartered and received a camera. No cameras were allowed, of course, during the imprisonment. Incidentally, some of you have asked who did the pen and ink drawings. Mom did those pen and ink drawings as we went along on pieces of paper and backs of old envelopes, and then gathered them together afterwards. So this is the main building. This is a large, huge building, 2 big central patios, 3 stories, and with the dormitory, the main dormitory. Here is the main dormitory again, and here is the educational building, a subsidiary building, 3 stories also full of internees, plus 75 Japanese guards who were there to guard us. This is looking from the educational building down on Shantytown. But outside here is the city of Manila, and here's the wall, the Japanese guard shack with a machine gun, and then the wall like that. The biggest problem was us internees, all squashed together. Some people had religion, some people did not. Some people had a nice personality, others did not. We were there squashed in like sardines. You say, did any of you try to escape? Just 2 men, 2 ex-sailors, and they were found and shot, and none of the rest of us as civilians had any connections to try to escape. Before we could obtain a shanty, our family had to live in the dormitories. And Dad and I slept in the men's dorm, which was the converted university gymnasium, about a 1/4 mile from the main building where Mom and Bobby were. And these homemade beds were so close together that it was difficult to pass between them without bumping one. And you'd have a fellow like this as your bedmate next to you, and when one guy wants to sleep, another guy wants to pack boxes. It was just a really tough situation. Our family of 4 tried to find a place where at least we could meet to have meals together. And so this is in the main dormitory, and we sort of staked out a little area with a table and a couple of stools. And but it was just bedlam. kids running all over the place, screaming mothers, yelling kids, wet puddles and confusion, and it was hard to find even a corner where we could set up. You had to put your name on everything, PDF, that's my dad's initials, and this little girl doesn't belong to us. It just, if you left it unattended, it would be stolen just in a flash. It was just crowded, miserable, noisy, and we were, as a family, we said, "Oh Lord, I wish we had a place where we could just be at peace, be a little privacy, where Bob and I could do our homework without having our pencils and our books stolen, and without having kids punch us out." That was, I'll tell you a little bit more about that. Well, by the way, it's the first time Bob and I had exposure to all the rough language and the bullies. I'll tell you about it now. These kids are bullies. And I was not very strong and hardy, and their favorite time was to go around and pick on people. And I learned a big lesson when I first arrived, new kid on the block. So I'm just dumb, ignorant, naive. Guy comes up and says, "I hear you're pretty tough." Well, you know, nobody told me, Dad didn't tell me, you don't say you're tough, even if you are tough. You say, "No, I'm not really." And I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty tough." So they said, "I bet you could beat Paul Young, couldn't you?" "Who's Paul Young?" "That's him right over there. A little scrawny kid about this big." "Oh, I probably could." Next thing I know, I'm in the ring with Paul Young, who absolutely wiped the floor with me. And I learned a big lesson on that one. And they used to play rabbit soup. Rabbit soup on dirt. And that means everybody runs after you, 10 or 12 guys, and they pile on you. And that was a disaster for me, because somebody would always have me around the neck, and I think I'm going to choke to death. And I learned to run very, very fast, like the wind. Well, the internees did all the work. And at the beginning of the war, when we first arrived, the Japanese were winning the war, and they said we can afford to be lenient, and so we used to have 3 meals a day, not particularly exotic, a light breakfast. At noon we would have rice and bean porridge, and then for variety, and with a little greens thrown in, and then in the evening we'd have bean and rice porridge with a little greens thrown in. These are the big vats that the porridge would be cooked in. Dad's job was to provide the wood for that and keep those fires burning. But the wood was green, and sometimes the smoke would fill. We had fights in the cookhouse all the time. This is a view from the education building down